Hello, everyone. Hello, welcome again to Bold City Civics. My name is Shelton Hall. I'm the co-host of this show. The founder of this illustrious organization, Mr. John Lewis Meeks, is right here with me.
Hello there.
Today, we're talking about how bills become laws. It's a complicated process, made more complicated by the fact that every city, every state has their own sort of specific rules. The general principles are similar, but there are certain details that make our system unique compared to other cities, other states. In the previous episode 2, for those of you keeping score, we talked about how those bills become law on the local level, how it works through the city council of Jacksonville and going through the mayor and things like that. This episode, we're going to expand on that a bit, and we're going to talk first about the State House, our state government based in Tallahassee, the state legislature. Let me break down the numbers for you really quick. Our state legislature meets for a 60-day session that usually begins in early March and ends right towards the end of April, right before May. A special session may be convened at any time during the rest of the year, and that can be convened in any one of three ways. A, by the governor. If the governor says we need a special session, we'll do so. Or by joint proclamation of the House Speaker, the Speaker of the State House, and the President of the Florida Senate, or by a 3/5 majority of the legislatures in both bodies. Now, we have 120 members of the Florida State House, and we have 40 members of the State Senate. So 96 votes between the two houses results in the creation of a special session. And those don't happen. Those happen sometimes, but it's usually because of, a budget issue or something happens. Say there's a natural disaster that happens when the State House is not in session, so they may meet to work out how they're going to fund the recovery and things like that. But by and large, it's March and April are when the State House meets. Our committees, the committees and subcommittees in the state legislature, they meet up in September, generally about 6 months before the full body meets, because there's so many. You think about the state of Florida, there are so many different pieces of legislation, so many moving parts, so much editing and revision and negotiation and lobbying that has to happen. They like to start that process about 6 months before the full session meets, so that by the time everyone convenes in early March, most of the time and in most cases, the legislatures already have a very good sense of what the agenda is going to be and how they tend to vote on it ultimately. And it's a very fast-moving process, whereas the lawmaking process in Congress up in Washington and in the Senate up there will be almost glacial to some people, and that's something we're talking about right now in the news. In the state of Florida, once the legislative session convenes, they crank out a ton of legislation super quickly, and it goes right up to the governor. Now, there are two houses of the state two different bodies of the state legislature. Excuse me. First is the Florida House of Representatives. There are 120 seats in the Florida House. Each member of the Florida House serves a 2-year term. Every 2 years, on the even-numbered years, starting the next one being 2022, all 120 seats in the Florida legislature come up for grabs. Currently, as it currently stands, the Republicans currently hold a majority of 78 to 42 in the state legislature. So legislation can be passed by a simple majority vote, which would be 61 to 49. 61 votes gets a bill passed in the Florida House. So and that's another difference between Florida and, say, Washington. Here right now in Florida, as in Washington, the chief executive, president/governor, and the legislative body, Congress/Florida House, are all the same party. Typically in Washington, you'll often have, especially after midterm elections, you'll have a situation where the president is of one party and the Congress is controlled by a different party. And so for the president to get his agenda through requires finding ways to get the minority party to add enough votes to get something through, which is not the case necessarily right now in Florida because both the legislature and the governorship are controlled by the same party. But, for example, with Democrats in the state house holding 42 seats, they would need to pull 19 votes from Republicans in order to pass a piece of legislation. And now, by contrast, the Florida Senate has 40 seats, and those terms are 4 years each. And half the senators, once again, those go up on even numbered years. So in 2022, half of the Florida senators will have their seats up for grabs, and then in 2024, the other half will. Whereas, say in Congress up in Washington, they have 6-year terms, and so every 2 years, a third of them go up. Legislation in the Florida Senate passes by a simple majority of 21 to 19. The minority party, in this case, would only need 2 votes to get to get a piece of legislation across. And as you all may know, depending on the legislation, depending on the time, it might be easier to pull those 19 extra votes from the House than it would be to pull those 2 votes from the Senate. The Senate tends to be more entrenched, more locked in. But once both houses have passed the legislation and negotiated amongst each other to make sure it's the same piece of legislation going through, it goes to the governor, who is Ron DeSantis. Once he signs that bill, it then immediately becomes a law. The governor has the option of vetoing a bill if he wants to, and if the bill is defeated, it basically is done until the next year's legislative session. The veto can be overridden by the legislature if it receives 2/3 of the votes from each body of the legislature, which would require 20 votes from the House and 26 from the Senate. That is something that will happen if you have, say, a Republican-controlled legislature and a Democratic governor, and they pass legislation that the governor's not going to sign because for whatever reason. But then if they have enough votes, which at this point, the Republicans have enough of a majority in both houses of the legislature now that they could generally override a veto if their legislation was vetoed, which it would not be. This episode 3, is going to run a little bit longer because I'd like to bring in Mr. Meeks now to speak about Tallahassee, particularly the accessibility of politics in Tallahassee and why it's so much fun to be a part of that process. Sir.
All right, thank you, Shelton. I think one of the central principles to our participative democracy is that we do have a connection to our state legislature. It's very close to us in Tallahassee, both proximally and also communications-wise. Of course, you can always write them or email them or call them, but I like to go the extra step and actually visit with our legislators. You always can visit with their home office in Jacksonville and here in Duval, or you could actually go to Tallahassee. I've got an Airbnb and spend a couple nights in Tallahassee to spend time talking to my elected legislators. Both I have visited with my representative, I also visited with my state senator as well. I'm of the mind of silence is complicity, and I don't ever want the powers that be to think that I'm just going to silently just sit by and approve or be complacent. So I think it's very important that each of us have the opportunity to understand that we can go to Tallahassee and be heard. And I've even hosted legislators at my own house for brunch. You can do that. I mean, we look at them as like these gods or celebrities, but they're people just like us. And a nice nosh, a breaking of the bread can really level the playing field for all of us. And it's just a simple matter of just asking. And the answer is usually going to be yes, because they do want to hear from the people they were elected to represent. Because if it wasn't for us, they work for us. That's the principle of it all. At the end of the day, I can even if we don't get our way, at least I know I've tried. And I think that's one thing as a civics teacher I try to really prevail upon to students and community, that part of democracy is just being heard, and to reach an understanding between each other, not just so we get our way, but to at least get out there and be heard, and to be active, and not be passive citizens just letting things just roll over us. One of the biggest lessons I have from going to Tallahassee is that there is no shame in ask even the most simplest questions, because you're not ever going to arrive at the answers unless you ask. It doesn't matter how old you are. You could be I've been on PTA days where students and parents and all stakeholders have gone to advocate for education issues. And like I've said before, science is complicity. If they don't know what we want, they'll just do whatever they want. And I think that's my 2 cents on the matter about being involved and engaged as a citizen in Florida politics. And I would even go further and say you could do the same with Washington, D.C., but it's a little harder. And I haven't done that yet, but that's probably my next level I want to do. I want to go to D.C. And meet with my congressman up there. That's my advanced class right there for myself.
Let's do that next year.
Sounds like a plan.
I'm in on it, absolutely. And let's say for the record, both of us come from families that have been long active in local politics and local activism long before we were born, and so we were kind of brought up into this stuff as children, and it's still a lot of fun. You and I became friends largely through shared interest in some of these political things. I ran for city council about a decade ago, back in 2011. I didn't win, but gosh, some of my best friends in the world I met. And I learned a lot about myself and about my community. The political system, it's very complicated, and for the average person, I totally understand why you think it's boring and why you have no control over it, but it's actually a lot of fun and it's super transparent. But I want to give a shout out to the reporters. As a journalist myself, there are many journalists who specialize in this lawmaking process. People like Nate Monroe, David Bauerlein, Emily Block here locally, and so many others on the state and national level who specialize in being in the halls of power and tracking the process of this legislation. It makes great first-person research. I would encourage all of you listening, especially you younger people out there, to follow your local news media. Follow the Tallahassee Democrat, follow Politico, follow the Florida Times-Union.
And the Tampa Bay Times, too.
Tampa Bay Times, absolutely. Follow Jacksonville Politics, the new blog, the new newsletter, Jacksonville Today, being produced through WJCT. And also those of you who might be coming up into high school, say if you're a high school freshman, high school sophomore, look into Boys State and Boys Nation. I'm an alumni of Boys State, and there's Boys State and Girls State. Men and women both are welcome in this. Young people, especially you kids out there, you are the future. You are why we do the things that we do. And no matter what anyone says, always remember that this is your country and your system, and all the processes involved in it are completely accessible to you.
And one more thing, too. Yes. Get involved from the ground up, from the ground level, by being a campaign volunteer. If you really find a candidate for office, you think his ideas or her ideas click with yours, volunteer. Go door to door, make phone calls, or if you have the means, to donate to their campaigns.
And right now we've got a special election coming up for the Missouri spot locally, and 2022 is the midterm election. All the national congressional seats are up for grabs, a third of the Senate seats, half of the governorships, all the state legislature seats, and half of the state Senate seats. There are a lot of exciting candidates, and if you're interested in getting involved in this type of work to any extent, especially you young people out there listening, you stay focused, you stay tuned in. We'll give you all the resources you need to move forward. And we thank you so much for your support